Well, thank you all for your time, for coming back after the break. I know this, I think that Janice and I have the two hardest slots because now you have sugar. You probably already had your caffeine this morning. It's sunny outside and you are wondering how much longer you're going to be able to stand this. But thank you for your time and attention for coming. I'm Steve Bloch. I'm an attorney at the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. I work out of our Salt Lake City office. We have offices in Salt Lake, Moab, and in Washington, D.C. We hold ourselves out as one of the largest of the state's largest conservation organizations. It's our 30th year. I think this year is now, SUA's been around for 30 years. Maybe it's starting in 2013. The focus of SUA's work is primarily on lands that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, who has about 23 million acres under its charge here in Utah. And our focus is on America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, which is a piece of legislation that's been introduced in every Congress since 1989. It was first introduced by Representative Wayne Owens, who is a Democrat out of Salt Lake City. It's currently introduced, they're sponsored in has about 100 plus co-sponsors in the House. We've had as high as about 160. And about 20 or so sponsors in the U.S. Senate. The passage, if it would ever occur, of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act would be a formal designation by Congress, who's the only entity who can designate wilderness under the National Wilderness Preservation Act, of about 9.5 million acres of land in Utah that's again managed by BLM as wilderness. I'm going to talk about some of my work over the past several years, which has been focused a lot on conventional energy development. And I'm happy to report, as we'll walk through in some of these slides, some of the success stories that I feel that we've had. As you can see by the title, I don't know that wilderness, or I don't think that wilderness preservation and energy development are mutually exclusive, that they can be compatible. I believe, as we'll talk about, at some level they result in high-level zoning decisions. Areas where energy development may be appropriate and areas where it's not. And that sounds very high-level and kind of simplistic, but at the end of the day, I think there's a lot to that. And we've been able to find some common ground with several operators in Utah and make that a reality. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some other examples that the Bureau of Land Management, some other programs it's undertaken, some of which we think are some missteps and then some of which I think we're heartened by. So let's get started. That's a shot of a colleague of mine down on the west, Tavaputs Plateau, which we'll talk about, Bill Barrett Corporation. This is in far eastern Carbon County, looking out to the Badland Cliffs, which is just across in Uinta County. That's 9 Mile Canyon in between. Certainty. Certainty is what, in my experience, what drives these conversations. It's what conservationists and what the oil and gas industry are after. It's not always what I think the federal or state governments are after, but I think from our side of the fence and in talking to several operators over the years, what people want to understand are the ground rules. And if I'm an operator, where can I lease and where can I develop and where can I move ahead with my plans and not have to be concerned that at every step somebody's going to be challenging that decision and perhaps succeeding, which then sets my plans back. And because these operators are driven by the bottom line and their shareholders, finding certainty is something that makes sense for them. And it also makes sense from the conservation side. I mean, I think despite the rhetoric and what I think is a misconception, we're not in this. SUA and the conservation community are not. I'm not showing up at my desk looking to pick a fight and looking for more lawsuits to file. I think we're seeking certainty as well, certainty in terms of which lands that the Bureau of Land Management, for the most part, agrees with the conservation community are wilderness caliber landscapes and moving towards the protection of those landscapes. And I think the protection of those landscapes is very consistent with what some of the other speakers have talked about today in terms of the benefits that those intact habitats have for wildlife, in terms of trying to think a little bit larger for climate change, that these undisturbed landscapes offer all sorts of benefits. 3 recent examples and sort of larger scale examples of where we have found common ground with industry. Bill Barrett Corporation in their West Tavaputs Plateau natural gas project, which is, I said, is in the 9 Mile Canyon, Desolation Canyon area, with Anadarko Petroleum Corporation and their project in the Greater Natural Buttes area, which I know we'll hear about tomorrow, but that's Anadarko's largest onshore asset in North America. And the agreement that we were able to reach with that company and how that relates to the White River proposed wilderness area. And then a smaller project on the south side of the White River with Enduring Resources, which is a small shop out of Denver that also had some good impacts or some good benefit for the White River. Just a few happy photos to sort of confirm if there was any question that these are spectacular public landscapes. These are places that are owned by all Americans and are managed on behalf of, that the BLM manages on behalf of all Americans. I'm sure we've heard about the recent push by the state of Utah, some of the legislators and the governor to privatize public land in Utah. Well, these are some of the places, and these are places, again, where the BLM, the Interior Department, Utah Wilderness Coalition are in agreement that these are spectacular landscapes that are deserving of wilderness designation. It also happens to be sandwiched in between on the north, as I mentioned, the Greater Natural Buttes, and on the south, the Rock House area. That's another shot of looking north. Most of Anadarko's operations are going to be up and above where you see the cliffs there. Looking out on the Desolation Canyon stretch of the Green River, one of the most iconic landscapes in the country. And the Bill Barrett Corporation has their project perched very close to the river. That's on the north side of the project, that's on the south side of the project. The Desolation Canyon proposed wilderness area is one of the largest roadless areas, if not the largest, in the lower 48. This photo's not intentionally grainy too, but I think it's useful to just, this was an example of, it's a shot of the Peters Point area, which is out and it's overlooking, it's a prow of land where there's been oil and gas operations since the 1950s. And what we're seeing is really intensive development, but it is that intensive, concentrated development, and that's what we worked with these, some of these operators, was to focus their development in some areas and exclude it from others. Some development just to the south of the White River on school trust lands. These are all natural gas wells. Most of the push these days is for conventional oil, but these were some of the newer wells here were drilled in the mid to late 2000s. Same for here when natural gas was a much hotter commodity. And then this is on either side of the White River. It's a lot of give and take. These are not agreements where somebody's holding a gun to somebody else's head. These are agreements, as I said before, because we're seeking certainty. And since it's a give and take, since it's a compromise, that means that we're having to give up something that we value. And so some of the things that in these agreements some terms that we accepted were allowing surface locations in areas that are proposed for wilderness. Well, that's not something that we lightly do. Those are the sorts of decisions that we routinely challenge in court. But as a part of an agreement to arrive at that certainty, there are some places where we were prepared to accept that. And then support or non-opposition for proposed development. Whether it was Anadarko's project or the Bill Barrett Corporation's project, it's not our business, of course, to be vocally supporting these sorts of activities, and yet that's what we were doing. I stood with Secretary Salazar and at that time the head of the BLM, Bob Abbey, some representatives from Anadarko, talking about the Greater Natural Buttes project in laudatory terms this summer at a press conference in Salt Lake City. And the Bill Barrett Corporation, one of their VPs and I toured around the state to talk about some of the benefits of achieving these compromise agreements. And it is a give and take. So whereas we're agreeing to some surface locations in areas that are proposed for wilderness, agreeing to support these decisions, we're seeing operators also willing to step up, and we've seen agreements for them to relinquish leases in wilderness study areas to reduce surface footprints. And you've heard some of that already about the best management practices and how operators can locate, if it's 6 or 8 or 10 or more downhole locations from one surface pad. Anadarko is in particular quite notable for what they've been doing in the Greater Natural Buttes area in terms of multi-phase gathering, in terms of green completions, things that are good for the environment and things that make sense for the company financially. I mean, they're doing these things, from my perspective, ultimately for their bottom line. And but there's not, and that's fine. I mean, that makes sense. They're doing it for their bottom line because it's useful, I think, for debunking this myth that more directional drilling, multi-phase gathering, things that have a smaller footprint on the land are going to cost a company, and that's why they don't want to do it. And what we see is that's actually not the case, that they make sense financially, and it makes sense to thank the companies to say that you're doing the right thing here. It's not that we're always on the same page, but when they're going to step up and voluntarily undertake these measures, I think that's significant. In addition, this summer we saw that Anadarko, in addition to eliminating some of their surface locations, to limiting their footprint, stepped up and has acquired some property along the White River, some private property. That's also significant to us. Boy, it makes sense, but it takes time to have these sorts of relationships. It's not the kind of thing where I'm going to walk in or where somebody who's in my shoes is going to walk in and we're going to immediately find this kind of common ground, but I think that's what people hope for or expect, but instead it takes a long time. Our work with Anadarko took more than 18 months. The work with the Bill Barrett Corporation started off with us absolutely at loggerheads and eventually achieving consensus. So to the extent that any of you are seeking those sorts of relationships, either from the conservation or wildlife side, I would urge you to be patient. There's several examples I can think of where, there were folks from the oil and gas industry where we couldn't stand being in the same room together. And now, we've been able to find some of that common ground. Of course, it's not all happy talk. And, some of the things that I think we found where energy development and wilderness are not fitting side by side are examples where the BLM is not fostering that kind of certainty. The Bureau finished 6 land use plans called resource management plans at the end of 2008, highly contentious plans prioritizing energy development over all other uses of the public land. And while that may be fine, or in someone's viewpoint, that may be the appropriate way that the land should be meted out, that's not really the BLM's charge. The BLM's multiple use agency, wilderness, wildlife are all parts of that multiple use agency. So decisions that overwhelmingly prioritize energy development, off-road vehicle use, things like that, over these other resource values are going to be challenged. And these 6 plans have been challenged in court. And the result at the end of the day is less certainty for all the actors. If it's state or local government or conservationists or the oil and gas industry, it's that lack of certainty. Also in 2008, the BLM finished a programmatic a programmatic environmental impact statement for oil, shale, and tar sand leasing and development. Same sort of issue where prioritizing shale and sands leasing over other uses, not, at least in our view, not taking a hard look at what the impacts to air, to climate, to wildlife would be from decisions that would really move shale and sands development forward. So that plan was also litigated, and the plan's now being revised. There is some hope, I think, or we see some other examples where the BLM is doing it right. Master leasing plans is something that the Salazar administration has come up with in response to a lot of the uncertainty from the Bush era, where oil and gas lease sales were appealed and they were litigated. This is a little more site-specific planning. Instead of land use plans that operate at the 30,000 foot level, these are maybe 10,000 foot is how I've heard some of the staff at the BLM describe it. The goal is to provide industry more certainty. So when industry nominates lands for lease, they're more confident that they'll actually be sold, and that if there are challenges, that the decision to lease will be upheld. From our side, more sensitive lands are going to be moved off the table. That the focus is finding lands that are less sensitive, more appropriate for this kind of development, and facilitating that. 5 master leasing plans in Utah: Vernal, Cisco Desert, Moab, San Juan, and San Rafael Desert. Moab is where the BLM is working, is starting on. This is Arches National Park, that's Canyonlands, that's a Labyrinth Canyon stretch of the Green River. For those of you that remembered the December of 2008 oil and gas lease sale, more, I think, famous now or infamous for the protests and the disruption at the sale, but master leasing plans kind of spun out of sales like that were highly controversial, and there were a lot of parcels that the BLM had initially proposed to offer for sale that were literally right outside of Arches National Park, adjacent to the park. And that's actually what the Moab Resource Management Plan, so one of those 6 plans that were finalized at the end of the Bush administration, that's what that plan allowed. So if you were in Arches National Park, I mean, literally, it was a buck and rail fence away from an area that was going to be offered for oil and gas leasing and development. And by doing this Moab Master Leasing Plan, which is this area in brown, the Bureau is trying to figure out if that's what makes sense in that area. And last, I know we heard from Jim Gazewood earlier, the Bureau has a solar programmatic environmental impact statement that they just finished, which we also see as a step in the right direction. It identified 6-state effort focused on solar energy zones. So this is the West, this is our home state of Utah, 3 solar energy zones in Utah: Wawa Valley, Milford Flats South, and Escalante Valley. So these are the areas where the Bureau is facilitating this sort of development in Utah, saying to industry, here's areas that have been pre-cleared for this sort of activity, and encouraging new development, solar development. There's solar leasing and development. There's 20 odd sites around the West you see with the blue dots. There's also some other land in Utah that's available for leasing, but the real focus is on these 3 solar energy zones. So again, we're hopeful that that's a way for the Bureau to move ahead with this solar program. So I would be happy to take any of your questions. Thanks for your attention.